G'day, it's Coach Pete from Ascension. On this Whiteboard Wednesday, we're going to discuss fatigue management. Now, fatigue management is an important thing to consider when we're designing and implementing our training programs. As we've spoken about previously, under Bannister's two-factor model, we see there's two side effects of training. That is, a stimulus of a training load or a training stress generates a positive effect, which is an improvement in our fitness, and a negative effect, which is an inducement of fatigue. Now, what our performance is, that is what we can do on a given day, is the difference between these two variables. That is, performance is fitness minus fatigue. If we oversimplify it, we think we want no fatigue and we only want high levels of fitness, which would result in our performance being the same as our fitness. However, that's not quite right. So a load of training stress, having an amount of fatigue, actually induces and causes an improvement in our fitness. We need to get the amount of fatigue correct though. If we have too much fatigue, we risk becoming stale, burnout, injured, or overtrained, which won't see an improvement in our fitness or our performance. There's a delicate balance though. Too little training stress, which will induce no or little training fatigue, won't cause large amounts of improvements in our fitness or our performance overall. So we have to balance. We can't have too much stress, we can't have too much fatigue, we can't have too little stress or too little fatigue. Our fatigue overall though has to be manageable. There's no point having an amount of training stress that causes the perfect amount of fatigue. However, we can't handle or cope with that fatigue because it's too painful or we don't recover well enough. So how do we go about managing our fatigue to make sure it leads to positive adaptations and improvements on our performance when it actually matters? And that's the key thing. Improvements in performance only matter for an athlete during competitions or competitive seasons. If we're recreational in our fitness pursuits, we don't necessarily have a competitive season or a competition day, but we'll have key times or potentially key dates in mind when we want to achieve our goals, so we can utilize the same methodology and find a key date where we hopefully will see an improvement in our actual performance. As I discussed earlier, training and competition are not the same thing. Training is an accumulation of fatigue. So we see an incurrence of fatigue and an improvement in our fitness, not necessarily an improvement in our performance. And we know that testing our performance regularly is not constructive to actually getting better at anything. Competition, on the other hand, is where we want to elicit our performance as close to our fitness as possible. That is, we want the highest amount of performance, so we want to see the lowest amount of fatigue. Effectively, we want no fatigue at all. If we have no fatigue on our competition day or our competition season, we'll see our performance and our fitness being equal, and we'll be at our current maximum potential for that given day or that given season. That's not the limit of where we can be overall, but it's the best we could do in the event or in the season, and that's what we want when it comes to competing. Same if we're pursuing fitness recreationally, we want the highest amount of performance on that day that we test, or that benchmark day, or that date we have in mind where we want to see an improvement in our body composition, in our strength, in our endurance, or whatever other fitness quality we're looking to improve and measure. We organise training in such a way that it leads to improvements in performance during our competition or our testing date. Our competition season, our competitive event, or our testing date is not necessarily constructive training. It doesn't necessarily make us any better the next time we want to test whatever fitness quality that we're looking to improve. Our training load, our training volume, our training intensity is larger in training than it is in competition because we're trying to induce that stress that leads to fatigue and improvements in our fitness. With this in mind, we need to consider what training quality we're actually looking to improve on our performance date, our competition date, and then how we organise training to elicit that improvement. Are we looking to improve our strength, speed, power, endurance, skill, or work capacity, or another physical quality? And with our competition or our testing, are we actually looking to test what is our aerobic or our anaerobic energy system? And if we're testing our anaerobic energy system, is it lactic or alactic? These are key things that come into how we organise and consider the best way to manage fatigue in training. With this in mind, we have a few tools in our belt. In an individual training session, we have our work to rest ratios. That is, how much work will we do prior to resting, and what is the duration of our rest. If we're looking to improve aerobic qualities, we're going to have a very small work to rest ratio, 1-to-1, potentially even smaller. If we're looking to improve our anaerobic energy systems, it might be 1-to-3, 1-to-5, 1-to-10, maybe even 1-to-20. That is, for 1 unit of time of work, we're going to have 20 units of time of rest. That'll ensure we recover the relevant amount of energy to then train the right muscle fibers with the right energy system. Additionally, with our work to rest ratios, we also need to consider, do we want to have active rest or passive rest? Do we want to have active recovery or passive recovery? So a simple example of passive recovery is if we're doing strength training or even aerobic training, after we do our training bout, we actually do nothing, and that's how we rest. That's passive recovery. You literally are doing as little work as physically possible in order to allow the greatest amount of recovery to occur. The other type of recovery we have in a session is active recovery. If we're doing sprint repeats, we might do an active recovery by walking. So for example, a 400 meter sprint repeat, we might run 400 meters at an interval and then walk 400 meters. We're still doing some type of work, but the intensity is significantly lower for our passive rest, but it still is work. And that's the key difference between active recovery and passive recovery. If we look at how we organize our number of sessions in the week, we have two key tools we can utilize. The two key tools we have for a training week really are our rest days and our active recovery or our light days. So we talked about earlier how we have work to rest in the individual session. Consider over the week, we have a work to rest ratio as well. And depending on what fitness quality, what our training maturity is that we're looking to develop, we'll actually have to factor in having days where we do not train at all. Or when we do train, it is deliberately light. Our rest days are really a form of passive recovery, and our light sessions are really a form of active recovery. But we're now looking at individual sessions throughout the entire week. So we factor in and we plan on having days of rest. The idea of having no rest days is completely stupid. There's a flawed concept some people have of team no days off or team no rest days. Completely flawed, because we know we actually need rest and recovery in order to allow our body to super compensate. That's when it actually does it. We actually see improvements and adaptations occurring when we recover. We start looking at a unit of time of the month, and we have two real key tools we can use. So just as we did on the session and a week where we have active and passive recovery, we can do that at the monthly level as well. So on the monthly scale, we might look at having deload or light weeks. We might have 3 weeks of building training load, and on the 4th week, for example, we might just have a very light session at 50% intensity and 50% volume to what our normal training loads are. That week really forms a form of active recovery for the entire month. And we might even factor in more rest days in a light week. That is, we're trying to increase the amount of passive recovery we have over the month. We look at how we then organize sessions into weeks, into months, and an entire program between competitive dates, between competition seasons, or between testing dates. The key tool we have at that level is a peak and taper, as well as active recovery phases. A peak or a taper sees an increase in our training intensity, a decrease in our training volume. And that's not just the volume of individual sessions, that could be the volume over the week or a change in the frequency. We're trying to remove fatigue in preparation for our competition, so our fitness and our performance are as close as possible as they can be. Active recovery typically occurs straight after our competitive season or a competition or testing date, and that might be 1 or 2 weeks, potentially even 4 weeks of just light training overall. It's going to be lower intensity, lower volume, and lower frequency to allow our body to recover from the stress of the entire program, as well as that competition or testing date or season. We're giving our body an overall big chunk of rest. Now, enduring over an entire program, it doesn't matter if we're looking at individuals, looking at individual sessions, if we're looking at weeks, months, if we're looking at years or even 4-year cycles, we always need to consider what our nutrition and sleep are. They are 2 of the most important factors when it comes to really good recovery. If we are sleeping inadequately, we're not recovering effectively from our training. It doesn't matter if we train to that day or not. Not sleeping properly throughout the week will decrease the gains or improvements we have in our fitness, leading to a lower performance potential overall. And we don't want that. We can also apply variance in an enduring fashion throughout our program, and we might vary how we organise our training stress in order to allow fatigue to be dissipated. That might be doing a different form of a lift at the beginning, then building in specificity. Could be, for example, training sets of 10 at the start of a program and then building up to heavy singles at the end of the program. We're varying the type of stress our body's being exposed to. We should see an improvement in how we manage fatigue. Linked to variance is also a manipulation of our training load. That is what the volume and intensity is overall, as well as our volume and intensity session to session, week to week, month to month, year to year. As our training maturity improves or increases, we're going to be able to tolerate larger training loads. That also means we're going to be exposed to larger amounts of stress overall, and we might actually have to more deliberately design how we're going to recover or restore from that. Frequency is an important factor as well. Different phases of our program will see a change in the amount of frequency of our training stress, as well as our recovery sessions. As we get closer to our competition date, testing date, or competitive season, we'll generally see the frequency of training decrease and the frequency of recovery increase. And that really leads to that removal of stress and fatigue, allowing us to see that high level performance. Lastly, we can also factor in deliberate restoration sessions, and that could be things such as having massages, icing, foam rolling, or a number of other modalities that allow our body to recover more effectively. Our inclusion of restoration sessions is based on a few things. Firstly, our training maturity has to be considered, as well as the type of training we're doing, our individual differences in how we respond to both training and recovery, as well as the load overall. We have to then factor in what phase of the program and how close or how far away from our competition are we. The biggest takeaway when it comes to fatigue management is having the most effective form of rest. That's rest in between our working sets, as well as having actual rest days in our program and sticking to it. If we have a day designated in our program that's a rest day, that's not an opportunity to try and jam more training in. That's going to lead to an increase in stress, which will see an increase in fatigue, which will see a decrease in our fitness and performance. We're also risking an increase in injury as well as overtraining. So rest when you're supposed to rest. So we need to eat correctly and we need to sleep as best we can as well. Now, in a perfect world, we'd all get the right amount of sleep and we'd have perfect diets. And that's not necessarily realistic for most people, but we need to strive as best we can to have the best recovery that we can. Thanks for tuning into this Whiteboard Wednesday. Don't forget to check out our website, www.ascensionbarbell.com. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.